Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you're joining us this afternoon from Nkolo Mahadum Wisdom University. This is a live lecture today, and today's date is Afo, Nkwo Market Day. Today's date is Nkwo Market Day in the Igbo lunar calendar. And then in the Roman Catholic calendar, today's date is 6/27/2025. And remember, at Nkolo Mahadum, we always advise you to use your naturally given common sense, which we call Akonuche in Igbo language. Also, we advise you that you should be listening to Nkolo Mahadum Wisdom University. Get away from the mainstream media because they are not telling you the truth. And also, everything we are doing, we are saying it from Biafran, from an Igbo man, from an African perspective, viewpoints, how you should be saying things. You see things from how it concerns you and not how it concerns other cultures. And therefore, we are encouraging you to please join us, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and the TikTok. And currently, we are live on YouTube, we are live on Facebook, and we are live on Twitter. And we also want you to like, comment, and share our lectures to get to your friends and well-wishers, because it is very important that you do. And in today's lecture, we are going to listen. Today's lecture will be based on an interview conducted by Professor Glenn Janssen with Cyrus Janssen. Cyrus Janssen is a geopolitical analyst, an investor, and a business consultant. His views on Africa, on what China is doing in Africa, and how the United States and China is fighting for Africa and other things in the world. And as we go through this process, remember that I will be interjecting from time to time. I will interject to explain to you, to explain the interview from the Igbo man, from Biafran perspectives. So as the interview is going on, we at Nkolo Mahadum will be stepping in to explain some of the interviews, some of the points from the Igbo man, from the Biafran and African perspectives, how you should be explaining it, how you should be saying it. And so without wasting of your time, let's go to the interview. And we are questioning if the US and China and other nations are coming to Africa to do this for us, why can't it be we, the Igbo people, the Igbo race, the Biafrans and Africans, going to China or going to America or going to Europe or going to Russia or going to Saudi Arabia to do the same for them? Why would they? Why will it be us always at the receiving end? It is very, very, very annoying. And that's partly why we want to use this interview as the basis for our lecture today. And so without wasting much of your time, let's go on to the interview.
Cyrus Janssen, an expert on China and also, China's economic development. So thanks for coming back on.
Glenn, my pleasure. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
So I wanted to ask you about China's growing presence in Africa, which is either it's demonized or it's celebrated. It's often, either way, huge attention around this, but often focusing on the Belt and Road Initiative. However, last month we saw that 53 African nations signed this 100% tariff-free deal with the Chinese. What do you make of this, new developments?
Yeah, Glenn, it's a great question. Well, I think I want to start really at the beginning, because I think for so many years we have always heard of China's ambitions in Africa being described as debt trap diplomacy. And actually, it's very interesting because this three words have now really come to represent what many in mainstream media and certainly Western media always used to describe China. But the fascinating thing is that the Belt and Road Initiative is now 12 years old, and there has never been a single project that has ever been seized by the Chinese government. They've never actually had a country default on their loans and then take that over. So there's this big theory, this basically a fear, given by the media that, look, China has ulterior motives. What they're trying to do is they're basically going to lend out all of these loans to these poor African countries. At some point, they're not going to be able to repay the loans. And then that's when China's going to make their big move. They're going to come in, they're going to take all.
So what Cyrus Janssen is saying here is that there is this information being passed by the Western media to the world that the Chinese loan that the China is giving to Africa is a death trap. It's a death trap that will, at the end, China will seize all the assets of Africans if they default on the loan. That is when they fail to pay the loan, that China will seize all the assets that they use that loan to do in Africa. But as of today, there's no evidence to show that China have confiscated or seized any of the projects that they delivered because of the inability of the African country that took that loan to pay back. So let's continue to listen to Cyrus Janssen.
Take all of this land, all of these government buildings. They're going to basically conquer Africa and colonize it. That's the theory. But again, we haven't seen a single piece of evidence to suggest that. And actually, we've seen the opposite. We've actually seen China actually forgive loans. And so we've seen them actually look at countries and say, you know what, we've given you this loan. You can't pay that back. We're just going to write it off, and we're going to write it off as debt, because on the Belt and Road, China has actually signed over 1,100 projects. And when you think about that scale, 1,100 projects throughout the world, think of it like an investment account, right? Not every project's going to be successful, right? Some of them will fail, some of them will succeed, some of them will be average. But with
remember, the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese government is when they come to African country or any other country, they use their loan to build your road or your railway or anything you want them to build. Then gradually you will start to pay them back. And the information the Western media, what they call the mainstream media, have been passing to the world is that the Chinese government will seize the properties that loan was used to build. But today there's no evidence. The evidence we have is that China is actually writing off the loan. In case of default, they will write off the loan. And they have almost 1,100, that is 1,100 projects that they have delivered with their Belt and Road Initiative across the world. Let's continue to listen to Janssen.
With 1,100 projects, you've got quite a lot of opportunity for some success. There has been a lot of projects that have done very well. And I think with the ones that haven't, they're able to write that off and still move forward, because over the portfolio, you still have a net increase, much like having a balanced stock portfolio. Okay, great. A couple of stocks went down by a lot of money, but we've had a lot of winners. And so the net return on the portfolio is actually positive. So yeah, this is the first point I really want to address, is that we haven't really seen any evidence suggesting that China is engaging in debt trap diplomacy. But very often it's like we see in Western media, we portray China in a certain way. And, this is used as a fear tactic to really make sure that people in the Western countries really fear China. I think ultimately it's because, for example, the United States, they don't have the resources to be investing and building an initiative like China. And so I think that's why they have to come up.
So what he's saying is that, yes, there are some African countries that have been defaulting on the loan, but when you do the minus and plus, there's a positive reward on investment, which means there's more that are positive. So they're not even losing much. And why the Western media is saying that the China is using the loan as a debt trap is because America doesn't have money, doesn't have surplus. You know that American budget is based on deficit. When you are running a deficit budget, it means that you are borrowing money. But China is running a surplus budget. So China has a lot of money that enables her to do this road and belt initiative across the world, why America does not. So they kind of badmouth, they kind of try to paint it black, what the Chinese are doing. That is what Cyrus is trying to explain. So let's continue with the interview. Very, very interesting.
To come up with these campaigns to try to smear China. And unfortunately, it's sad because, you know, what Africa desperately needs more than anything is the roads, the airports, the ports, the infrastructure. That's how you get out of poverty, right? It's not by donating food, and that's a common saying, right? Feed a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach the man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. So that's how China is really helping out these countries by actually building the infrastructure where they can, in fact, build up a business, get out of debt, and actually have a potentially better future.
And
building infrastructures is the key for development. Building your roads, building your airports, building your seaports, building your railways. These are the infrastructures that Africa needs for development. And even this talking about China, why should it be China coming to Africa? Why can't we do it by ourselves? Don't we have people in Africa? Don't we have people in Igbo land, in Biafra land? Why can't we do these things by ourselves? Why should we be waiting for a foreigner, for the Chinese to come all the way from their land into our land to start to build these things for us that we know that we needed to create employment for our people and empower our economy, develop our own economic empowerment by ourselves? Why should it be China or America or any other country for that matter coming to do it for us? Why can't we do it by ourselves? These are the questions every Igbo man, every African should be asking ourselves. Let's continue to listen.
And well, what are the main areas though that China's focusing on? Because often it's seen as simply being, well, maybe it's a bit of projection, but often it's the assumption is that they only want their natural resources, but the economic cooperation goes well beyond resources, even though of course Africa is very resource rich.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's very important to understand with Chinese people and certainly Chinese businessmen is that they're very pragmatic. It's very much like, look, we're be honest. Obviously, China is very interested in the resources from Africa. So is the Western nations, right? Every country is interested in the resources from Africa, but the difference is what are you going to provide in exchange for that? So, for example, if you're building schools, hospitals, roads, airports, railways, and tangible benefits to the people of Africa that are going to improve their quality of life, well, that's a very nice exchange, right? We're going to give you something for that. And I think what we have to really look back on, Glenn, is the history of colonization. We look at countries like France and the UK, the United States, that have a very long history of being in Africa, but unfortunately, it has always been a policy of extraction. What can we get from you? And let's be honest, we don't really want to give anything. We want to give you as little for it, and we don't really.
So the guy is saying that even when you go back to the history of colonization and the relationship between the Western Europeans. Remember, when we say the Western Europeans, we mean America, Canada, Britain, France, Spain, Germany, Australia, New Zealand. All of them are Western Europeans. So all they do is when they come to Africa, they want to give you some conditions, many conditions, without helping you to build anything. And that's where China differs from them, because China will come in trying to build schools, hospitals, railways, roads, airports, seaports for Africans. That is why Africans kind of prefer the Chinese approach to develop to their development than the Western one. But the question we at Nkolomahadum is asking is, why should we be waiting for foreigners to be coming to our land to be doing such projects for us? Why can't we do them ourselves? So let's continue to listen.
Don't really care about your development. And I think there's a very interesting survey that was published earlier this year, and it was conducted over the span of, I think there was about 1,100 surveys throughout Africa. And it was by a Western think tank, and they said, this is quite amazing because the evidence actually shows that China is genuinely popular amongst many countries in Africa. And so, especially with the youth, they actually broke it down by age demographics. And there was, especially, under the age of 25, very positive, almost over 75, 80% positive response, and how they're looking at China. And again, I mean, if you are under the age of 25, you would have been growing up in a brand new school or a new road. And it's like, hey, guess what? This was built by China. This is who came into the country and built this. And that's why you get to go to school today, because you have a new road there and you have a school there because China built it. And so it's a very interesting.
What he's saying is that there's a poll that was conducted as to know in Africa which country they like better. And the poll suggests that African countries like China better than America or any other Western countries. Because why? Because when they grow up to learn that all the roads in their area, all the railway, all the airports, all the seaports, all the schools and hospitals were built by the Chinese, they're kind of very, very happy that the Chinese are the one that is building all these roads for them and not the Americans or Britain or France or Germany or all these Western countries. So they have a positive, they like the Chinese for that matter. But the deep question we continue to ask from Nkolomahadum is, why should it be China that is coming to Africa to build these things for us? Why can't we build them ourselves? That's the question we have to be asking ourselves. Let's continue to listen.
Interesting, way to build your power and your reputation. And I am all for it. I think it's great. I think it's great for China to do that. And the other thing, Glenn, that's important to understand is that when China builds these projects, they send a tremendous amount of Chinese people that actually live there. So I think when the United States will come to do a project, it's not like people want to move their families there or, establish themselves in African countries. Most Americans are like, no, let's do the deal and get out of there. Let's go back home. Whereas many Chinese actually relocate to Africa. They become part of the community. Their kids become born in Africa. I was in South Africa before, and I was, down in the Chinatown, down in Joburg, and all of the little Chinese kids there are speaking Zulu with the local kids, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. But of course they would speak that. They're born and raised there, right? They're as local as it gets. But
so what he's saying is that the Chinese approach is to send their people, the Chinese people, to come into the community and live in the community and speak their language. Unlike the Americans, who will just come in and do a project and go back to America. They do not stay in the community. For us at Nkolomahadum, this is dangerous. For the Chinese to be allowed to be living in our communities and speaking our language, that is trying to change our demography, which means those Chinese, after about 100 or 200 years, they will not go back to China. They will be citizens of that country automatically, which means indirectly exporting Chinese citizens into African lands. That's not good. And that is why we are asking, why should we allow foreigners to come and be building all the infrastructures for us? Why can't we build it? We have the resources, we have the people. Why not? So let's continue to listen.
But, they're speaking Chinese, they're learning English, they're speaking Zulu, and that's the difference in China's approach.
Yeah, I guess this these stats are important because whenever you get these media reports, there's always this idea that, well, China wants to take advantage of Africa. We're going to come and help them. But obviously, this is really denying some agency there. But how do you see China's role in Africa, though, evolving? Because what it was 20 years ago is not the same as it was today. And then leading up to where they're today, where they're actually able to sign this agreement with, again, 53 African nations.
Yeah, but I think what we really have to take a step back here, Glenn, is look at just how impressive that is, right? It's 53 of the 54. The one nation that didn't is a very small nation that has diplomatic relations with Taiwan. So they formally recognize Taiwan as the government of China, so they're not in on the deal. But the vast majority of I mean, what's 53 out of 54? I mean, it's nearly the entire continent is pledging forward. And there's kind of an interesting thing as well, is when you look at the difference between how China and the United States does their diplomacy, it's actually quite fascinating. Every other year, or every year, sorry, there is a Africa-China summit, and that actually rotates. So one year it'll be in Beijing, the next year it will be in a country in Africa. So it rotates back and forth, and that's really important because Xi Jinping will actually personally go and attend this summit in Africa with all of the African leaders. For example, when the United States hosts their summit, it is always held in Washington, D.C. It has never once been held in Africa. And so you can see just how that simple fact alone means quite a lot.
He's also talking again about the differences, how the United States deals with African leaders and how it differs from the way the Chinese people deals with African leaders. That the United States every year hosts a summit with African leaders in Washington. That meeting must be in Washington. Unlike China, China have it in such a way that you do one in China, the next year you do the next one in African land, on African soil. But even at that, all the meetings with African leaders supposed to be in African land. It doesn't have to be in China or in Washington. If you want to talk to African leaders, you come to Africa and talk to them. This idea of always inviting African leaders to Washington or to Moscow or to China is very, very bad. We are not beggars. It shouldn't be so. But he also saying that in the last meeting with China, 53 out of 54 countries in Africa signed a free tariff. China gave African countries, 53 of them out of 54 that signed free tariff in the purchases of their goods. And our question again is, why should we always be buying goods from China? Why can't we be manufacturing those goods ourselves? All these things that we are going to China to buy, why can't we be the one producing them in Africa? Why should we always be going out to buy foreign goods with free tariff, while we can as well produce them in our land by ourselves? That is what will give us the identity and makes us equal to every other person in the world. And African leaders should sit up. So let's continue to listen to him.
Because to host it in Africa means you're giving face to them, right? It means this is really a partnership, right? This is a two-way street. And, when you actually look at the U.S. Africa Summit, so much of that content is actually, we think you should be working with the United States. You should not be working with China. And so it's almost like it's a 2 to 3 day session of trying to convince African leaders that the United States is better. Whereas China, they're not going to lecture. They're not going to care if you're doing business with the United States. Hey, you do business with whoever you want, but we're having a China-Africa summit, so we're going to talk about how you do business with us. And so, there's almost this jealousy factor. It's a very interesting dynamic to observe, where it's very common, a lot of.
So what he's saying here is that during a summit with African countries in Washington, the American government will be asking African leaders, why are you doing business with China? You better do business with us. Leave China alone. On the other hand, when the Chinese are having summit with African leaders, they don't care about whom you are doing business with. They just want you to do business with them. They do not ask you, are you doing business with A country or B country? They don't care about that. So the question is, why would the United States always want African countries to be doing business only with them and not with China or Russia or any other country in the world? I mean, the world is free for everybody. You should be free to do business with anybody that business, works with you. What we are saying is that you are free to do business with anybody that you agree with, and not making you not to do business with this country or that country. It's just like during the colonization, during the mercantile trade, where African countries are preventing from trading with any other country than the metropole. The metropole is the colonizer. For example, Nigeria should be doing business only with Britain. Burkina Faso should be doing business only with France. That's what they've been doing during the colonial time. Are we still in the colonial time? Africa should be allowed to do whatever business they want with anybody. They shouldn't be restricted. It's like Washington is restricting them, but China is not. And that's why they say they are liking China the more. Let's continue to listen to him.
A lot of American leaders will come and they will, constantly lecture these African, people that, this is what you need to do. You need to be working with us. And it is quite interesting where there's kind of a saying is when a U.S. leader goes to Africa, they give a lecture. And when China leader goes to Africa, they bring a road, a port, an airport. There's, again, this tangible benefit. And I think that's why you saw 53 nations come together, declare, hey, moving forward in the.
So what he's saying here is that each time an American leader or British leader or France leader, any of these Western leaders comes to Africa, they just come and talk. They just come and lecture you and talk and promise things that they don't fulfill. Unlike China, when China comes to an African country, it comes with tangible things, come with road construction, with airport construction, with seaports, with schools, with hospitals, with other tangible things that you can see. Unlike the Westerners that will only come with bare hand, come with nothing, but only with their mouths. This is the difference between how the Chinese and the Americans are handling the African leaders. But what we are saying is, why should we allow them to be playing ping pong with our people? Why can't we produce what we want? Why can't we construct what we want by ourselves? Are we not human enough? That is the question we shall be asking ourselves. Let's continue to listen to him. This is very, very interesting.
But in the future, we are going to be putting a lot of our time and effort with China, and we believe that China is going to be a more stable force in the future. Glenn, this is a very interesting thing. The Alliance of Democracies, a big think tank, just a couple of weeks ago published this new survey that now shows that 79% of the world now have a higher opinion of China than the United States. So this is actually much more of a global, trend, I would say, is that, yes, Africa is leading that way, but we see this pretty much in the global South, which would be Latin America, South America, all of Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. So this is actually the global majority of people in the world. And this is
what he's trying to say, that it's not only Africa that are seeing the West. The West means America, Canada, Britain, France, Germany, Spain, Belgium, Holland, all of them. When they come to your country for business, they only come with mouth. They only come talking. It's not only Africa that have noticed that. Other countries, other parts of the southern parts of the world, like the Asians and the Latin Americans, they also have seen it, that this is what they do. Unlike China, which will come with some tangibles to help out with their loan. So let's continue to listen to him. This is very, very interesting.
And this is quite amazing when you start seeing that. And that really should be a wake-up call to the United States politicians, to really understand, look, this is, the world, the perception of the world is changing.
Traditionally, you've had the British and French colonial influence and post-colonial influence, and then, of course, the United States being a more, let's call it a more modern empire. But the entry of China into Africa really disrupts some of the former power structures. To what extent, I know, is this visible, or is this something that the Chinese are struggling with?
I don't think they're struggling, because I think with China, what I really feel is that we know the Chinese are very good at doing business, right? That is what Chinese people do. If you spend time in China, you realize that most Chinese people, they have a very big hunger to do business, to make deals. I mean, at the end of the day, this is the big difference here, is that, for example, China comes in saying, look, we want to do an exchange. You give us A, in return, we'll give you B. We don't need to talk about politics. For example, I don't care what government you run in Africa. There's many different types of governments that exist in Africa. You can have whatever government you want. We're not going to lecture you on that. Again, we're here for A. We give you A, you give us B. Very simple, very pragmatic. And it's a very stark contrast, because in the United States, we have had our senators say, for example, we don't support this African country on gay rights, for example. And if you do not change your policies in your country that appeal to us, we will sanction you, or we will cut off your access to the US dollar, or we will potentially not trade with you. And China says, look, we're not going to get involved. I mean, what you do in your country and the laws that govern your land, that's your country, right? We're not here to tell you that you should convert to a communist government. We're not here to tell you, hey, the policies that your government is passing in your country don't apply to Chinese values. You don't see these contradictions. And so, again, I think you have a very pragmatic approach where, again, China, this is why China is the #1 trading partner for nearly 150 countries around the world, because, again, it's really just about the business. We don't need to get into different ideological.
What he's saying, that the China's approach also that differs from the Western approach, is that China will come in and say, hey, you have this raw material here. If you give me this raw material, I'm going to do this and this and this for you. Unlike the West or the Americans, when they come to you for a deal, they will ask you, you have to believe in gay practice. If you don't believe in gay practice, if you don't believe in Western democracy, we're not going to give you a loan. We're not going to work with you. We're going to sanction you. So these are the things, all the conditionalities that the Americans and their Western allies are imposing on the rest of the world. But China is not doing like that. China will just come in and say, hey, you have this, let me have this, and I will give you this. They don't participate in politics. They don't ask you which religion you are worshiping. They don't ask you your ideology. They don't want to know. They just want to do business straight. Unlike the West, they will bring in this, bring in that into the business. And that is why many countries don't like to deal with them anymore. They are running to China, because China's way is simple and simplistic. Let's continue to listen to him. That is very, very important.
Battles. I think this is a very clear point from China, that they're very grounded in what China's government is, right? They're very grounded, saying, look, we know what government we want to have in our country, and we will continue to move forward with our plan for our country. But I don't see China going around saying, hey, we should be spreading, Chinese with, socialism with Chinese characteristics. This should be the model for the world. I mean, again, we see the opposite, right? We see the opposite with the United States. The United States is very much, if you're not a democracy, you're an enemy, and we want to change you. We want regime change. We saw even this week, there was a published probably the most ridiculous report I've ever seen published from a U.S. think tank, saying, preparing for China after the CCP, what's going to happen when Chinese government fails. And it's this 80-page report published by the Hudson Institute out of Washington, Washington, D.C., and it's talking about all of these, the China's government's going to fail, democracy is going to come in, here's how American businesses can benefit, this is what America is going to do. And I said, this is a fantasy, right? This is just, I'm sure U.S. politicians might like that to happen, but again, I'm recording this on the ground in Guangzhou, China. Come to China, come to talk to the people, come to see how this country is moving forward. You will see no evidence of this, that this is going to happen. And again, how is the United States interfering in somebody else's country? This is a sovereign country. They get to decide, right? The people that decide what government exists here will be China's government and Chinese people. They should have no.
Again, what he's saying is that the American government, and again with their allies, Britain and the rest, when they come to do business with you, they will tell you have to be democratic. You have to follow Western democracy for them to do business with you. If not, they will sanction you or do regime change to push somebody that will bring in Western democracy to your country. But China doesn't give such conditions. China doesn't care about the type of government practice that you are, governmental system that you are following in your country. They don't care. What they just care about is coming to your country. Hey, we need this. We're going to take this from your country and give you this. They don't go into politics or democracy or no democracy or gay marriage or any of those things. So those are the differences between how America and her allies does business and then China. And that's why China is winning. Let's continue to listen. That's why China is winning.
Have no outside influence at all. And so again, I think, especially for me, Glenn, as a United States citizen, I'm very concerned by this because I see the democracy that is failing in my home country. I see the political problems. I see the instability. And I mean, in my mind, let's focus on our house. I mean, gosh, I don't think there's many countries around the world right now looking at the U.S. president, U.S. democracy and thinking, that looks great. I think we should study that political model. But if you do see, for example, China's economic model, that is a blueprint for Africa and for these smaller developing countries, because this is quite amazing. 50 years ago, the country of Chad in Africa was actually more wealthy than China 50 years ago. So you look at this case study of how China has been able to rise above and become, go from one of the top 10 poorest countries in the world 50 years ago to now, obviously the second biggest economy, number one economy in terms of purchase power parity. And so you look at how China has been able to evolve, and how did they do that?
What Cyrus is saying here is that the American government is beating about the bush. They are too proud about their democracy. Why their democracy is failing. And that's why we are maintaining at Nkolom Hadum Wisdom University that this Western democracy should be stopped in Africa. It should be stopped because it is not helping Africa. It is not the model we should be practicing in Africa. We should go back to our own Republican democracy as given to us by our ancestors. Cyrus alluded here that the democracy of America is falling. It's not, nobody is copying it. Nobody is copying it. But they will go ahead and be pushing African countries to practice that democracy. And he also said that the Chinese model, that 50 years ago, that China was a poor country, but the economic model have catapulted them, have brought them from being a country in poverty last 50 years and now to one of the most richest countries in the world. That model should be copied. The economic model of the Chinese should be copied and not the dying democratic system of the Western Europeans. Let's continue to listen to him.
Do that because of economics, because of opening up, because of manufacturing, because of building the infrastructure, investing. I've traveled extensively on the high-speed rail over the last month in China, all over the country. It's my favorite way to travel. And the train stations are packed. I mean, the ability to get on a high-speed rail and just get to the next city within an hour is just incredible. I mean, that really does transform how business is done in a country. So I think this is where you know, and especially in Guangzhou. Guangzhou has the largest African population in China, so there's a tremendous amount of Africans that come here. I've had a chance to talk with many of them. It was fascinating when I was coming through the airport customs. There must have been.
He was talking about his experience in China, the high-speed rail that they have in China that can transport you from one city to the other within 1 hour. The high-speed rail. And you don't have any high-speed rail in the United States. You don't have it. But in China, they have it. He's saying that it makes business transaction more easier for the Chinese, for you to move as fast as you can from one station to the other. And that's what we are advising our people in Igbo land, in Biafra land, and in Africa, to build railroads, build rail lines, build a rail line connecting Oka to Onitsha, a rail line connecting Onitsha to Nnewi, a rail line connecting Nnewi to Oka, and Oka, Onitsha to Enugu. That is Onitsha, Oka to Enugu. And you'll be another one from Onitsha to Owerri, to Aba, to Port Harcourt. That's what we need. The fastest the rail line, the fastest the business transactions will be going on. Let's continue to listen to him. And also he's talking about the African people that he saw in China, he met in China, a lot of African people in China. Let's listen to him and see what he was saying.
And 500 people in line, I would say 80% were from Africa, and all kinds of different outfits, different passports out. I mean, I was like, wow, this is really incredible to see, you know, so many different people. I said, I would love to make a YouTube video just interviewing all these people and saying, you know, what's your impressions of.
He was saying that in China, in the airports, that if you have 100 people standing in the line, that 80 of them are Africans. That's not good for us at Nkolom Adam. 80 of the people out of the 100 standing in line are Africans, which means Africans are the ones migrating. Either you are migrating or you are going for business in China. 80 out of 100. Why can't it be the other way around? Why can't we be the ones producing in our land, in Biafra land, in Africa, so that the Chinese will be coming in large numbers into our land to do business with us? Why shouldn't it be, why shouldn't it be the other way? Why should we going over there to do business or to buy things? Why can't we produce those things in our land? That's the question. Let's continue to listen to him.
Of China, what are you doing here? You know, and kind of hear their stories. I think that would be fascinating. But I mean, that, you know, again, this is what's happening, right? You come here on the ground in China, you see, you know, tens of thousands of Africans here in Guangzhou, you know, coming here. This has been a very big hub for African people for decades. You go back to Africa, you see Chinese people there. So it's very simple. I think once you remove yourself from this Western media bubble, you actually start going to places like China, start talking to African people, start really seeing what's happening. You'll get a different perspective of the world.
He said, once you get yourself out of this Western media bubble, the Western media bubble is where they lie to people. They lie to the world. They don't tell you what is going on around the world. So when you get yourself stuck with CNN or BBC or any of their affiliates and other main media, what they call mainstream media, once you get stuck with them, you will not know what is going on in the world. That is why we are advising Africans to always join us at Nkolom Hadum Wisdom University, because here we present things from the Igbo man, from Biafran and African perspective. We tell you the truth, what is going on and how it is affecting you, so that you will know how to adjust to be successful in this world. Get yourself out of government media. Mainstream medias are government medias or corporate medias. They are not telling you the truth. They are telling you what they want you to hear and not the truth. And that's what he's saying, that as soon as he got up from the mainstream media, stopped listening to private medias, he began to understand how truly the world is. Let's continue to listen to him. Very, very, very important.
The world. And so I think China's in the driver's seat, in my opinion, for the future of Africa.
It's interesting what you said about the extent to which values should be imposed on others, because there's two ways of looking at it. As the West, we always say when we put conditionality on trade, and then it's promoting good governance, which is a sign of virtue. And the criticism then of China is that they don't do this; they'll just do business with anyone. And
Right.
but again, it's worth discussing to what extent that is actually a disadvantage, because doing business with everyone, it does. It does appear to be a better model in many ways, and also the universalism of it, because if I have the assumption that your values, your ideas should be imposed on others, this universalism is very much front and center, not just in the United States, but I guess the political West. That is, these are our values at this point in time, they should also be yours. China has very openly talked about it is preserving the distinctiveness of civilizations. Especially Xi Jinping at least has spoken a lot about this.
Yeah.
I would just I was wondering though, to what extent Africa is included in wider economic connectivity. For example, is there any cooperation on for financial issues? The banks, do they have currency swaps? And also, I know this is something, which has occupied you, the replacement of the American-led GPS with the Chinese Baidu system. Is this something that in the tech sector, is this something that being developed in Africa as well?
Yeah, this is a very big story that is actually quite fascinating. So, during this 12-day war between Israel and Iran, there was a point where all of a sudden you started looking at, how was Israel getting this information, for, targeting these Iranian officials. And they actually were using GPS on their phones. They were tracking their Instagram, their WhatsApp messages. And there's a big vulnerability there that if you are using these American-controlled networks, that unfortunately, you literally have a target on your back. I mean, the United States, and actually not many people know this, but GPS, the system that is very much around the world, is actually controlled by the U.S. military. So it's actually, it's obviously a great technology. It's great to have. I use it every day. Myself, I mean, I'm very happy to have this navigation system. But what happens is we start looking in the future and where we're going. And I think there's a lot of people that necessarily would not want to be tracked by the U.S. government. And this is where, for example, Iran said, you know what, we're shutting this down. China has an alternate system. What a very interesting thing happened is that, this actually goes back to 1993. There was actually a cargo ship from China, Chinese cargo ship that the U.S. government thought was transporting chemical weapons to Iran. They shut down the GPS. They stalled this cargo ship in the Indian Ocean for 24 days. And of course, they inspected it and they found nothing wrong. There was no chemical weapons, but China was very frustrated. They said, how can you just have the authority to shut down our ship and demand that you search it? We were doing nothing wrong. It's just a cargo ship. But the U.S. said, that's our prerogative. We're the world police. We can do whatever we want. And so this was, again, 1993. And it was at that moment China said, we need to build our own. We don't want to be relying on this because it's a vulnerability. And it's kind of a common thing that we see between U.S. and China. For example, the space station.
Now, what he's saying is that the GPS system, the GPS now, the GPS you use for driving and everything was developed and is owned by the United States military. So they can use it to target you. That is that GPS was what Israel used during the last 12 days war with Iran to target Iranian officials and kill most of them. And also in 1993, they also used that system to track a Chinese ship that was going to Iran, and they dismantled the GPS system on the Chinese ship and took that ship away for 24 days, after which the Chinese said that, if this is what the Americans are doing, we are not going to use that GPS again, that we should develop our own GPS system. So the GPS everybody is using is owned by the American army, and they can use it to track you at any time. So that's why Africans should always try to manufacture their own electronics, their own system. This is a wake-up call for Africa, for African countries, for the Igbo race and Biafrans to manufacture your own GPS. Manufacture your own, because when you rely on others, they will use it to catch you. Let's continue to listen to him. This is very, very interesting.
Station, right? United States and many nations around the world work together. The International Space Station is a collaborative effort. Well, they said, China said, we'd like to send our astronauts there. America said, you're not allowed. We can't have you come to our space station. So China said, okay, fine. We build our own then. So they built their own. And, very soon the International Space Station will be decommissioned. China will have the only space station there because, again, there's opportunities to collaborate. But if the U.S. is going to restrict the Chinese, then they will do that themselves. We've seen that with microchips. You're not allowed to buy our advanced microchips. No problem. We'll build our own. Hey, you're not allowed to have the Android system in your phone. You're not allowed to use Android in the Huawei phone. No problem. We'll build Harmony. It's our own operating system. So, this is a continuous theme that we see in many, many different things. As far as the financial thing, I think what's very interesting.
So before we go to the financial thing, what he's saying here is that you see this, there's a space station above the sky, right? There's a space station there. When the Chinese people wanted to send their astronauts to that space station, that is trying to cooperate with America. America said, no, you are not allowed to send your own astronauts into our own space station. And now the Chinese people say, Chinese government say, okay, now we will build our own. Also in the chips, the Americans are restricting the Chinese from using their own chip. And the Chinese say, okay, we will develop our own. And they develop their own. So what we are saying is this: the Igbo race, the Biafran people, the African people, try to develop your own things. Develop your own things that you call your own. You know the beginning and the ending that belongs to you. This thing that is happening to China, remember how powerful China is, that they are being treated in this way? How then do you think you will be treated if you will rely on their system to be doing whatever you are doing? This is very important. That's why we are using this interview as basis for our lecture. And before we continue, we have to ask you again to please join, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. And like, comment, and share, because this is very important for Africans to know and do the right thing. Let's continue to listen to him.
Very interesting is we are seeing these currency swap agreements where renminbi is being used a lot more in international trade. For example, if we are, South Africa and, we have the rand, and then you've got the, Chinese renminbi, we're doing trade. Why not conduct trade in our local currencies? Why not, bypass the US dollar if we don't have to use that? I think that's becoming a more common thing around the world. We had the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, come out and say, this is terrible. Like Brazil, they're doing more trade with China. Like our tariffs and our sanctions will be completely useless in just a few years because they're going to be bypassing the U.S. dollar. And so again, this is a result of when your government is constantly putting these tariffs and sanctions, and you look at how many tariffs and sanctions, people are getting tired of this. People just do not want to deal with this. And so I think the Beidou satellite system, which is China's GPS equivalent, is now operating in almost 70% of the world now has turned on that system and has this alternative. And, here in the streets of China, I use Baidu, for example, Baidu Maps. The technology is fantastic. I mean, it's much more advanced than like Google Maps. I mean, accuracy down to the, really down to like your centimeter. I mean, it's amazing how accurate, these, things are, and how amazing the maps are. And even when you're using the navigation system and they have all the 3D buildings in there, I mean, it's really, really detailed in how they've done that. So, again, I think it's what kind of world do we want to live in? And I think it's a world where there's a lot more cooperation. And I think China right now is winning in a lot of ways. They think they just had, we had the BRIC summit in Brazil a couple of weeks ago. countries like Vietnam have joined. Indonesia is now a full member. I mean, there's a lot of different movement going around, and again, a tremendous amount of interest from Africa. And
what he has said is that because of the disagreement between the American people and their, the GPS owned by the American army and the Chinese people, where they use it to stop their ship and took that ship for 24 hours, that the Chinese now produce their own GPS system called Baidu. And that Baidu is even more better than the GPS of America. And that America also is using sanctions and the US dollar as a weapon against other countries. And now many other countries are now trading in their own currencies. Why not? Why can't countries swap their goods and services, even go back to trade by barter? Every country should have the right to do so. Nobody should stop or restrict or redirect a country from doing business any way that it will benefit the country, as long as it is not killing somebody. And so a lot of countries are now using their own currency to trade instead of going through the US dollar. And it's now biting on the dollar and the US government. And that is why Michael Rubio is now complaining that the US dollar is losing her grip in the economic configuration or conglomerate of the world. Let's continue to listen to him. This is very nice interview that every African should wake up to the realities of things in the world.
And I think the big thing, and kind of the moral of today's video and our interview today is you can just see is there's a hungry desire. Glenn, I mean, you and I are both YouTubers. Every time I put out a video giving an update of this, I'm amazed at how many comments I get from African people. Hello, Cyrus, I'm from Mozambique. I'm a big fan of BRICS. I love what China's doing. We want our country to be there. Hello, I'm from Nigeria. Hello, I'm, from South Africa, from, Algeria, from all over. People are genuinely really wanting to see this. And it's quite incredible to once again, you remove yourself from the media bubble and, actually start talking to African people, they get a very different perception about what's happening in our world right now.
Well, in geoeconomics, you pretty much learn that if you have excessive economic dependence on the...
He was saying that when he got up from the mainstream bubble, what he means by mainstream bubble is government-owned medias, corporate medias, or media houses owned by people associated with government. When he got up from there and entered into YouTube, started doing his own thing in the YouTube, he do get a lot of, comments from across the world, mostly from African people, telling him how they like the BRICS and everything and so on and so forth. And so this is very, 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 very important. We are happy at Nkoloma that African people are waking up, and let's keep driving up and take our energy, put our energy into manufacturing and building things for ourselves and exploiting our raw materials by ourselves and converting them into finished products. This will give us the platform to compete very well in the world. So let's continue to listen to him.
A more powerful state, this is usually converted into political influence. And this is why you often do see this, though, that if you're too dependent on the technology on a foreign nation, they will use this ball against you, as you said with the Chinese ship. If you're too much dependence on the currency, then they will also have this extraterritorial jurisdiction. If you're too dependent on the banks, even payment systems, I see that China's also the SIP system, which is the alternative to SWIFT, is also now spreading quite nicely, because simply as an alternative, because if there is only one venue you can go, then that's you give that actor a lot of political power. So I think this would be positive for Africa altogether, the ability to actually diversify, to avoid all this concentration of power in one economic partner, which well, then makes a political sovereignty very difficult to achieve.
Absolutely.
Just as a final question, though, is there what is the you mentioned that people like Marco Rubio has expressed concern that our future sanctions won't work if countries have alternatives, but as China's making all these inroads into Africa, I mean, the United States have a big budget for informing people how bad China is in the media, which is, we used to call that political propaganda, but fair enough. But how else is America attempting to counter this? Because China seems to be, it's not stagnant. It's the cooperation team seems to be expanding. So more nations encompassing more and more economic activities. How is the United States going to respond to this? Are they doing a complementary development program? Are they seeking to sabotage the Chinese? What can be done?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, it was interesting, Glenn, a few years ago, you heard the United States wanted to come up with their own Belt and Road Initiative. They wanted to call it the Build Back Better, the triple B, the Build Back Better. We're going to, we're going to build it. We're going to start investing all of this. And, it's kind of a very interesting thing that happens in the U.S. where, and I really relate this to how our politics work, because when you're running for president, you need to say things to get a vote, right? Actually, you can say whatever you want because you're never held accountable for actually achieving it. So it's like, hey, we're going to build this amazing wall on the border of Mexico. It's going to be tremendous, and guess what? We're going to have Mexico pay us to build the wall. So a lot of voters are like, great, sounds great. Of course, that's never going to happen. But you can that's the problem, right? You can just say whatever you want. So all of a sudden, the United States says, okay, we're going to, what? China has the Belt and Road. We've got to build back better. And of course, like America is, we're going to do it better. We're going to do it bigger. We're going to do it better. It's going to be amazing. We're going to invest billions of dollars. We're going to do all this great stuff. And then all of a sudden, 18 months pass and you don't hear anything of it again, right? You do a Google search. You can't find any article on it. You ask, people asking the media, anything updates on the Build Back Better, it's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. So again, you almost have this announcement to try to, gain some credibility. But at the end of the day, again, if you're not on the ground.
What he's saying is that he was asked what the Americans are doing now to be able to compete with the Chinese road initiative. And he was saying that the American people have now come up with their own way to compete with the Chinese. They say build back better. They will say they want to go to Africa or any other place to start building infrastructure in the build back better. And they will tell you that they're going to do this and do that. But after some months, you don't even hear any of these things anywhere. It's just for political talk. It's just political talk. It's just talking, no action, no fulfillment. And that's what they've been doing to a lot of Africans. They say something, they don't fulfill it. Let's continue to listen to him. It's very, very interesting.
And you're not actually building the tangible things. How are you going to influence the people? And this is where that study comes in, is very important when you say, look, we've conducted all of these surveys throughout all of Africa, right? This is not one survey. This is hundreds and hundreds of surveys throughout all the countries in Africa, and really talking to different people of backgrounds and villages and everywhere you go. And we've concluded in this report that China is genuinely very popular. And of course, like I gave that illustration earlier, if these younger kids, why do so many of them have a positive, thought of China? Well, again, when I was born, I had this road that was built, and I get to go to school. And guess what? The road, the airport, the school, the port, everything's been built by China. You're going to have that nice, positive affiliation, with China. So I think, as far as the U.S., I think, unfortunately, the only thing they're going to do is continue to lecture, and say, look, we're the global superpower. You should work with us. But, Glenn, you and I both know that the world has changed. It is not the unipolar world that once existed where, yes, there was a time in history where the U.S. was the only superpower. They were relatively unchanged and they had a tremendous amount of leverage. But those days are beyond us. And it is a world right now where it is multipolar. And I think the world has two options. You know, you can either work with the United States or work with China. But I think most countries are trying to work with both. You know, again, I mean, I'm a U.S. citizen. I would love countries, you know, my companies and my country to do business in Africa. But I know that China will be there as well. And I think, again, I think that's I really want to point the difference in the U.S. approach. The U.S. is, you know, it's amazing. You know, you actually listen to the African leaders after they come to Washington, D.C., and they attend this U.S. Africa summit, and many of them are very vocal. You know, I come here and I get lectured. I come here, and not only that, it's also how I'm spoken to. You know, Joe Biden in the last summit, he said, "Well, this is what we're going to do for the continent of Africa. African people need this." And the African leaders are like, "Hey, we're 54 nations. We have 54 individual needs. You can't just lump us all together. Yes, we're all African, but the continent is very unique and diverse. You know, just look at the landscape."
What they are saying here is that America and her allies is forgetting that the world has changed. But yes, that before, about 200 years ago or 250 years ago, yes, America is the major superpower that we have, doing whatever they want and get. But now the world is changing. And because the world is changing, you have to find a better way to be dealing with other people. Because now that the BRICS, which is Brazil, India, China, Russia, and South Africa, plus other people that are joining BRICS, a lot of countries are joining them, standing for multipolarism, that is multipolarism, that is more voices, more influence than unipolarism. The American and the British and France and Germany approach is, that is NATO, is for unipolarism, globalist order, that the world have changed. That, for example, when the African countries came to Washington last time, Joe Biden is promising all of them one thing. But Africa is made up of different culture and different people. Not every country needs the same thing. You have to find a way to find what each country needs and address that need than offering all of them one thing, that this is what you're going to do for them. That's what he's trying to say here. And that is wrong. That is how they are treating African countries. They don't treat you as if you are equal to them. They just offer you whatever they want to offer you. You can accept it or not, and you must accept it. Their condition is you must accept it. If you don't accept it, then they're going to do a regime change. Let's continue to listen to him.
Landscapes and how, not every country is the same. So we're all going to need different things. And that's where China would actually have a very different approach. They would say, let's have 54 individual meetings. Why? Because we need to meet with everybody individually and figure out what everybody needs. So just that difference alone is going to be the difference between success and failure over the long term. And again, honestly, it's just business 101. That's just about cultivating relationships and, honestly, just taking time to listen to the counterpart. And I think that's unfortunately not the United States' strength, because the United States, our way is the best way. We are the best. We have this American exceptionalism that unfortunately is bred into us from a very young age. But as you can tell, I've spent a lot of time abroad. It's not like I don't like the United States. It's my home country. I'll always love the United States, and I'll always be proud to be U.S. But I'm proud to also be a well-traveled American citizen that understands how this world works and understands that we need to build relationships, and that's the key to having better economic success in the future.
What he's saying that the Americans, when they come to do business with other people and Africans, they will tell them, our way is the best way. We are the best people. We are American exceptionalism, that we are number one. You have to follow what we tell you to do. You have to do it like we want you to do it. We don't have to listen to you. They don't listen to anybody. Unlike the Chinese, you have 54 African countries. The Chinese will go to every country to find out what they needed. But unlike in the US, they will just give you something and tell you to do it their own way. They don't want you to do it your own way. That this is American way. American way is the best. You see, that is the attitude they're still using to be addressing the African countries. And that is why we are saying, why should it be African countries always at the receiving end? Why can't we be the one going to America and telling them what we're going to do for them, what we're going to offer them, or invite them to come to Africa so we can tell them what we can offer to them, and not we going always as beggars to receive. It shouldn't be so. So African leaders, Igbo leaders, Biafran leaders should wake up and do the right thing. Let's continue to listen.
Yeah, I hope more people pay attention to Africa, because this the population growth, also the economic growth. People often ignore that many of the fastest growing economies now are Africans as well. They are doing quite well. There's a lot of opportunities. So it's a bit the fact that China will be have a key role in this. It's quite an important historical development. So
it really is.
Anyways, Cyrus, thank you so much, my friend, for taking the time.
This is the end of the interview with Cyrus Janssen, who is a geopolitical analyst, investor, and business consultant with Glenn Dixon. And you have had all the interview, and we're going to be bringing our lecture to an end after analyzing this interview. So what we are saying is this: China is coming to Africa. They're coming to Africa with tangibles to build roads, railways, seaports, airports, schools, and hospitals with their loan. The Americans are coming with nothing. They're just coming with mouth. America and the other NATO people like Britain, Germany, France, Belgium, Spain, they're coming with mouth. But what we are saying is, at the Colombo, why should it be China? Why should it be another country coming into our own land? And the Chinese even have it that they will import their people to come into Africa and learn our language and live in Africa. That is not good, because that is trying to change the demography in the long run. Those Chinese people, when they continue to stay and producing children, are you going to send them back to China? The answer is no. So that whole policy of allowing foreigners to be coming and doing things to Africans should be looked up and stopped immediately. Africans can do things by themselves. We can explore. I mean, we can be able to get our own raw materials out of the ground. We can be able to turn them into finished products. We can be able to produce everything we need in Africa. We can be able to construct our roads, our hospitals, our railways, our schools, and so on and so forth. And we are calling on the leaders in Biafra land, in Igbo land in particular, to build railway from Onitsha to Enugu, from Oka to Onitsha, from Oka to Nnewi, from Nnewi to Onitsha, and from Aba to Owerri to Onitsha, from Port Harcourt to Owerri to Onitsha. Build all these railways for our people, because it will help to increase business activities. We shouldn't be waiting for foreigners to be doing things for us. It is time for Africa to stand on their own. And with this, we shall be bringing today's lecture to an end. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a very, very good one. Thank you. Bye-bye.